Hi, everybody. I'm KHOU 11 meteorologist Pat Cavlin coming to you from Houston, Texas with your Tuesday, August 29th tropical update with the latest on Hurricane Idalia as it starts to gain strength in the Gulf of Mexico. There's the latest advisory as of 1 p.m. Central Time. We've got a very strong Category 1 hurricane now with winds sustained at 90 miles per hour. So we're on the upper edge of Category 1 strength. The next stop is going to be Category 2, probably as we get into the later afternoon or the early evening hours. This storm is moving pretty fast as well right now to the north at about 15 miles per hour, and pressure is on the way down, now down to 974 millibars. So I think we're starting to get into a period here of rapid intensification. On satellite, it is starting to look a little better. We've got some huge feeder bands, though, moving over the state of Florida, but the convection in the center is looking pretty symmetrical, and it is finally starting to wrap around the entire storm. And this is really what Idalia has struggled with over the last 24 hours, was closing off that eye wall. It finally did that this morning, and that is really pretty much been the catalyst for its strengthening so far during the day today. The reason why it was struggling is because it was dealing with a lot of wind shear coming in from the northwest, and so that really helped to kind of chip away at that northwestern edge of the storm. But now we start to see those storms fully wrapping around the center of circulation, and once that happens, it insulates the core from any outside influences, and that is what helps this thing to take off like an engine. So that's really what we're going to be dealing with here as we go through the next 18 hours leading up to landfall. Switching gears now, we're looking at the visible satellite. We still have daylight to look at that. And again, you can really see those storms kind of bubbling up there in the center and wrapping around. We don't have an eye yet as of about 2 o'clock Central Time. I think that's going to change, though, by this evening as this thing really starts to bring up its intensity. We're going to see that eye develop. Now, how does an eye form? Think about it. With thunderstorms, you've got fast rising motion. Once all of that air that's in the thunderstorms gets to the top and fans out, it has to start sinking. So if rising air leads to cloud development, what leads to clouds clearing out? Sinking air. So all of that air that goes up in those thunderstorms around the center of the storm fans out, starts to sink. That's how your eye develops. So as those storms wrap around that eye, that air starts to sink in the middle, you get the eye clearing out, and then things are off to the races. So that's a look at the storm right now. Again, big feeder bands moving over the state. These have actually led to tornado warnings here up and down southwest Florida, and this is going to be the case here, I think, as we go through the rest of the evening. So a lot of rain pretty far removed from the core of this storm, and this thing is going to continue to strengthen here as we go through the next few hours. So this is the latest forecast track from the National Hurricane Center, expecting again Category 2 strength later this evening. Still about, I would say, 300 to 400 miles to the west of southwest Florida. And then, so again, between tonight at 7 p.m. and tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., we're expecting this storm to go from Cat 2 strength to major Category 3 hurricane strength as it makes its approach here to the Nature Coast up towards the Big Bend of Florida. Cedar Key still looking like a likely area that's going to see some extreme impact. And then from there, the storm continues north across North Florida, here through the low country as a tropical storm still. Notice winds in here sustained between 50 and 65 miles per hour. And then it reemerges over the Atlantic, where a lot of questions still remain about how well it remains intact and where exactly it goes. But the impacts from the storm, and I know everyone's been talking about Florida so much, they are going to extend up into South Georgia, the low country of South Carolina, and into coastal portions of North Carolina. And if you're watching from those areas, you know the low country is very susceptible to flooding. So I think the flooding risk is going to be pretty pronounced here across several states over the next few days. So what is steering the storm? Well, we had a very weak cold front go through southeast Texas here in Houston the last few days. Didn't really do much to temperatures, but it brought the humidity down a smidge. That boundary, though, is getting stalled out here across the southeast because it's starting to meet resistance from Idalia. Now, Idalia can't just blow through the front, so what's going to happen is it's going to act as a guide to steer Idalia, again, into the Big Bend of Florida, and then eventually up the coastal Carolinas before eventually moving out to sea. So that's why the storm is taking that path there, that kind of strange path that's arcing, instead of going up the east coast towards places like the Northeast and New England. So again, I think the cutoff for the impacts here will be up through North Carolina as we get into the end of the week and the weekend. All right, so again, we talked about wind shear being a big factor on the storm over the last 2 days. That is kind of what kept it in check here the last 24 to 36 hours. Wind shear will not be a big issue going forward. It may limit some strengthening from time to time, but as it starts to move over that really warm water and it starts to improve its look on satellite and starts to get its act together and more organized, it's going to be better at fending off any weak wind shear. By the time we get to Wednesday, though, so into tomorrow, notice we start to see stronger areas of wind shear coming in from the south. That's actually where we're starting to pick up the southern branch of the jet stream here. There's a trough farther to the north, and so that's going to help to scoop this thing up and, again, eventually carry it out towards the coastal Carolinas and out towards the Atlantic. So these are all the steering mechanisms and all the influences that are at work right now with Idalia. But again, we're not going to see a lot of influence from wind shear on this storm until we get to Wednesday and Thursday. All right, so let's talk impacts now. Everyone's always so hyper-focused on the cone for the exact point of landfall. Again, a reminder about what the cone is. This just shows the probable area that the center of the storm will travel over. However, in a 5-day forecast, it's only accurate 60 to 70% of the time. Now, we're within a 24-hour window now, so there is high confidence that the center of the storm will stay within this cone, maybe with a few wobbles, but we are not expecting a hard turn to the right into southwest Florida like we saw with Ian last year, and I don't think we're expecting a hard turn to the right into Tampa Bay either. That being said, you don't need to be in the exact path of the center of the storm to feel impacts. And you can see this here. This is future track radar with one of our high resolution models. And I overlaid it there with the track just so you can get an idea of how far away from the center of the storm you're going to see these rain bands expanding all the way down towards Tampa Bay, all the way out towards Jacksonville, and then all the way up towards coastal Georgia. I mean, you're talking about feeder bands into Tampa Bay about 130 miles away from the center of the storm. And that's just the rain impacts. We're also going to see huge amounts of storm surge here up and down the west coast of Florida, all the way down towards Marco Island. The values will diminish as you go farther south here in Florida, but still Tampa Bay expecting some really significant storm surge as we go to the next 24 hours. The storm passes just offshore. So let's give you a step-by-step walkthrough of what future track looks like with this storm starting this afternoon. Again, starting to look very healthy here. There's that big feeder band out towards southwest Florida. So the model is initializing the current conditions really well, which gives us high confidence in how it's going to perform going forward. So we put this forward into time as we get into the evening hours. By 10 p.m., again, the forward motion on this is about 15 miles per hour. This thing is already past Fort Myers and now starting to come in line with areas like Tampa Bay, Sarasota, Bradenton, all the way down towards Longboat Key. So this is going to be a big weather maker tonight in the Tampa Bay area. As you get all this wind coming in from the south, that's going to take the water in the Gulf of Mexico and it's going to push it into all of those beaches, into the barrier islands, and eventually into Tampa Bay as well. And that's where the storm surge is going to be a huge threat. We also see heavy rain in these areas and the potential for some tornadoes. Again, they've already had tornado warnings down through southwest Florida. So that's tonight. Now we go through the overnight hours. This thing really starts to intensify. How can we tell? Not only the radar appearance of it, but also the amount of black lines that we have there, which are kind of hard to see, I get, but the more there are and the tighter they are packed together, the stronger the storm, and we're seeing a lot of them here in this image. So just before sunrise Wednesday now, this thing is probably about 50 to 100 miles offshore. Again, sites set here in the Nature Coast, somewhere between, let's say, Apalachicola and Cedar Key. And from there, it continues to make its way onshore as a major, at least Category 3 hurricane, passing somewhere over the I-10, I-75 intersection there by Lake City, and then continuing into South Georgia. Eventually, the rain starts to shut off in the Tampa Bay area by midday tomorrow. So here's other model plots. So we just showed you our high-resolution future track. Now we're going to go to the two big global models that we always look at for hurricane forecasting, the American GFS model and the European model. We're going to look at these two to see if there's any wobbles or any deviations from what we just showed you. And so far, it looks like they're in good agreement as we get into the overnight hours and into the very early morning of Wednesday, so tomorrow. In good agreement with timing, pretty good agreement here with location. GFS maybe about 25 to 50 miles to the west, and then they really start to kind of narrow that gap there. So again, good confidence that we are going to see landfall with this system somewhere here in the Nature Coast, getting into Apalachicola Bay. So this is just to the east of Mexico Beach, which is where they had that huge storm, Hurricane Matthew, several years ago. This is to the east of Panama City, and this is going to come very close, though, to Tallahassee. And that's a city that we haven't talked too much about in these videos, just because Tampa with the storm surge has been such a big focus, but Tallahassee needs to start keeping a very close eye on this, and I'll show you why right here. So we take those lines and we actually put them on a map with precip and with pressure lines. There's the European computer model. There's Tallahassee. A lot of big pine trees, a lot of big oak trees in this area. So power outage is going to be an enormous concern here along the I-10 corridor going from Lake City through Tallahassee and into the Panhandle. So again, it's a storm surge concern for the coastal spots, storm surge concern here for Southwest Florida into the Big Bend, and then a power outage concern, I think, in this area. Sure, as we get into the areas to the north of Tampa, we could see power outages as a concern, but that really increases as you get closer to that I-10 corridor, just because we start to see more dense vegetation, especially getting to South Georgia as well. So that's the European model. The GFS model showing a very similar situation. Perhaps with an even more intense storm, you could see a lot more of those lines on there indicating deep pressure, low pressure with the storm system. So bottom line, this is going to be a very intense storm as it comes on shore, which means rapid intensification is likely as we go through this evening and into the overnight. All right, let's talk more about impacts. Again, we're going to start with rainfall here. A good 2 to 4 inches expected here from Tampa Bay down through Fort Myers. This is much needed rain, by the way, and we can see locally higher amounts, of course, if these feeder bands set up over one area. But these spots are actually in a drought right now, so this is kind of welcomed rain, although flooding could be a concern. I think flooding is going to be a bigger concern, though, as you go farther north, where we get these pockets here in the magenta where rainfall goes about 5 to 8 inches. So into, again, the Nature Coast, getting into South Georgia, places like Tifton, as you get into the I-75 corridor, going up to Cordele, Unadilla, and then along I-16 as well between Macon and Savannah out towards places like Vidalia, where they grow all those onions. This is where we could see some major flooding concerns here as the storm starts to push inland, and it doesn't end there. Remember, I talked earlier about the low country. So now we get into Columbia, South Carolina, down through Charleston into Myrtle Beach, as you get into Wilmington, North Carolina. So these areas could see really significant flooding here between now and Friday on the order of, again, 5 to 8 inches with locally higher amounts, upwards of a foot of rain. So really big, far-reaching impacts even after the storm has lost hurricane strength. All right, let's talk about storm surge, because this is going to be probably one of the biggest impacts that we see in Florida from this storm system. And the latest forecast from the National Hurricane Center as of this morning brings 10 to 15 foot storm surge to the Nature Coast here in the Big Bend of Florida. To give you perspective, that was the forecast and the storm surge that we saw in Fort Myers Beach last year with Hurricane Ian that pretty much wiped 70 to 80% of that city off the map. I mean, buildings and homes completely destroyed and wiped away. So we're talking about really significant and catastrophic impacts here for these small little villages, for these small towns here along the Big Bend coast. Now, going farther south, again, 130 miles away from the center of landfall, we're still talking huge impacts here into Tampa Bay. Again, because of the shape of Tampa Bay, we're going to see that water funneled in. So the storm surge impacts don't end at St. Pete. They go into the city of Tampa. The Riverwalk area could be under several feet of water as this storm starts to move up the coast. We could see 4 to 7 feet of storm surge in this area. That goes all the way up towards Newport Richey, and then farther to the south now is where it starts to drop off, but still significant. Again, these were areas that were significantly impacted by Hurricane Ian last year. So 2 to 4 feet here from places like Englewood Beach all the way down through the Lee County Islands, Sanibel, Captiva, into Fort Myers, and then going farther south towards Marco Island. And then the storm surge is still going to be an issue down towards the Everglades, but it really does start to drop off. All right, so because of this, we have storm surge watches in effect for coastal Collier, Lee, and Charlotte counties Going beyond that, it's a storm surge warning. And here's the caveat. Not only are we going to see a lot of water getting pushed on shore from the hurricane, but this is coinciding with our next full moon. And so as high tide cycles come in, coupled with the full moon, we could see an even higher risk for storm surge, flooding, and inundation here from places like Sarasota and Bradenton all the way up towards Tampa Bay, getting into Newport Richey, and of course getting into the Big Bend of Florida. So storm surge warnings in effect here again, where we could see storm surge values in this area of around 10 to 15 feet. Additionally, of course, tropical storm warnings in effect here, again from Port Charlotte all the way points south, and then hurricane warnings from the Sarasota area getting into the Big Bend. Apalachicola, you're included in some of those warnings. And Tallahassee, the state capital, again, haven't spent a lot of time talking about it, but you could see some huge impacts tomorrow in terms of wind. Hurricane warning in effect for you. And that's not where the watches and warnings end. Tropical storm warnings now in effect from Savannah, Georgia, into the first coast here from Jacksonville, getting into the Space Coast, and then up into the low country of South Carolina, and then tropical storm watches as you go farther north than that. So bottom line, next 24 hours, this is it. Storms making landfall within the next 24 hours. Finish the storm preps now if you live in Tampa, going all the way into the Big Bend, places like Lake City, Jacksonville, Ocala, a lot of big trees here along the I-10 corridor into Tallahassee. Power outage is going to be a huge concern in this area. Same deal as you get into South Georgia, going out towards Savannah. These are the areas that really need to finish those storm preps right now. We're going to keep bringing these updates as Hurricane Idalia strengthens in the Gulf and makes landfall. And please, if you have friends or family in this area, if you live in this area, be safe. Listen to the evacuation orders. Listen to everything from the officials. And we're going to keep you updated here over the next 2 days.